Today we're going to continue our conversation in contracts in Chapter 13, Capacity to Enter into a Contract. Capacity is the legal ability of a person to do something. The general rule is this: most adults have full capacity to enter into a contract. Thus, capacity to enter into a contract is presumed. The party claiming incapacity must prove it. Our law treats certain classes of people as either having limited capacity to contract, which means their contracts are voidable, or no capacity to contract, which means their contracts are void. Remember, a voidable contract was a contract that one or more parties has the right to cancel, while a void contract was no contract at all. The following people have a limited capacity to contract, and thus their contracts are voidable. 1. Minors. 2. Non-adjudicated incompetence. And 3. Voluntary intoxication. Finally, adjudicated incompetence have no capacity to contract, and thus their contracts are void. Adjudicated means a court has determined that this person does not have the ability to enter into a contract. They have been adjudically said that they are insane. We're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about minors, and we'll start on the next slide. A minor is a person who is under the age of 18. Thus, they are not an adult. However, they may enter into a contract. The slide says they may not enter into a contract. That is incorrect. So minors can enter into a contract, but their contracts are voidable at their option. Not void, but voidable. As you will find out in a moment here, you should never, ever, ever enter into a contract with a minor. While the person is under the age of 18 or a minor, the minor may disaffirm but cannot ratify the contract. Let's talk about both disaffirmance first and ratification second. Disaffirmance or disaffirm means to cancel the contract. Thus, a minor can disaffirm or cancel the contract at any time while they are a minor, as well as for a reasonable time after reaching the age of majority. Usually it's 1 year, but it will depend on the facts or circumstances of each case. Let's talk about some interesting things that come up with disaffirmance. Hypothetically, let's say a minor sells widgets to an adult. Then the adult sells the same widgets to their friend who's also an adult. The friend or the third party has no idea that the widgets were sold to the adult from the minor. So the friend or third party thinks that the adult has good title to it and has no idea. So under the common law or the old law, when we have a situation where a third-party purchaser buys an item of value and has no idea that the item that they bought was obtained from a minor, under the common law, the minor gets the property back from that innocent third-party adult friend. The UCC has modified the common law and says that the minor can't get the property back, even if given to an innocent third party, when the innocent third party paid value for it and had no idea that the minor was the one who sold it to the original adult. Now, let's say the minor bought property from adult and then wants to disaffirm. So let's say, for instance, a minor buys a vehicle from Camacho Automotive under the common law, and then let's say the minor destroys the vehicle the next day. Under the common law, the minor has no duty to put the adult back into what's known as the status quo. The status quo is the position that that person would have been had the contract never been in existence. So which means the minor can walk away and is good to go. However, the modern law has taken a much more realistic view on this and saying that the minor who disaffirms a contract may have to place the adult back into the status quo under certain circumstances. Why ever put yourself in that position? The bottom line is this: never, ever, ever contract with a minor. So remember, a minor can disaffirm or cancel the contract at any time while they're a minor and for a reasonable time after reaching the age of majority or 18. Now let's talk about the second thing on this slide, ratification. Ratification means that there is no more right to disaffirm or cancel the contract. Thus, as stated, a minor can never ratify because they have a limited capacity to contract. They can enter into a contract, they just can't ratify it yet. When does ratification occur? Ratification occurs after failure to make a timely disaffirmance for a contract after a reasonable time, usually again 1 year. So let's say someone is a minor, they bought a car, the day before they turned 18, they keep the car parked in their garage. And then for a year after turning 18, they don't drive a car. They can no longer disaffirm, and the car has been what's called implicitly ratified, because the person who used to be a minor, who is not an adult, failed to disaffirm after a reasonable time. So even though they didn't drive the car while they were 18, they ratified it implicitly by not making a timely disaffirmance. In addition, ratification can be done by using the product after reaching majority. So the kid buys the car when he's 17. The day he turns 18, he continues to drive the vehicle. That's ratification, because using the product after majority ratifies the contract. Of course, when the minor who turns an adult says, "I ratify," then the contract is also ratified. I oftentimes get questions about emancipation. And emancipation is simply the termination of a parent's right to receive services and wages from a child and or to control the child. So if a minor emancipates from his or her parents, they can make decisions on their own about their lifestyle. However, just because a child decides to emancipate from their parents does not give the minor the capacity to contract, which means even if you enter into a contract with a minor who has been emancipated, that minor still may avoid or make that contract voidable at his or her option. How many times have you or you've known someone lied about their age in order to make themselves older in order to obtain services? Happens all the time, right? So a minor's right to disaffirm while they are still a minor may be affected if the adult can prove the minor lied about his or her age. Okay. So one school of thought is that courts may require that person who's a minor who lied about their age to disaffirm only if they restore the adult to the status quo, or what happened before the contract was entered into. Another school of thought says that minors may be stopped from disaffirming if they lied about their age. almost like the notion of promissory estoppel. In addition to these two schools of thoughts, minors may be held liable not in contract, but in tort for civil wrong for the civil tort of deceit. We all need things to survive. Some things we want and some things we need. When we talk about need, we get into this notion of the law called necessaries. Necessaries are things that you need in order for your continued existence. Minors, just like adults, have necessaries. Necessaries can include such things as food, medical care, shelter, etc. However, even though these things are necessary, items will not be considered necessaries for minors if the minor's adults or parents are willing and or able to supply similar items. So, like my son Colby can't go into the Vans store and buy a pair of shoes claiming that it's a necessary because it's not a necessary because he's got 22 pairs of Vans at home. Here's the rule on necessaries. Minors are held liable in what's called quasi-contract or court-made contract basis, not for the actual value of necessaries, but for the reasonable value of necessaries. We have this doctrine so that vendors feel comfortable with dealing with minors, because if we didn't have this doctrine of necessaries, adults would never contract with minors, because remember, minors can always disaffirm the contract while they are still a minor. So minors can still disaffirm a contract for necessaries. However, they're going to have to pay for not the actual value, but the reasonable, they'd still be responsible for the reasonable value of the necessaries that they purchased. Whether an item is deemed to be a necessary depends on the facts and circumstances of each case, such as the minor's age, their station in life, and their own personal circumstances. So oftentimes a big deal arises whether a car is a necessary, and it's going to depend on the facts and circumstances. A car could be deemed a necessary for the minor who needs it for work at a job far away or schools far away. However, a car probably would not be deemed a necessary for a minor who's avoiding riding a school bus to school. The adult has the burden of proof that the item was in fact a necessary, to prove that that item was a necessary. Let's talk about incapacity next, and then we'll talk a little bit about intoxication, even though it's not on the slides. Incapacity is people who are mentally impaired, lack capacity to contract. Their contract could be voidable if they're non-adjudicated incompetence, or the contract could be void if a court adjudicates them to be incompetent. Incompetency can take on many things, such as a mental illness or brain damage or dementia or PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome, stress disorder. So the test of incapacity is whether the party at the time the contract was entered into had sufficient mental capacity to understand the nature and effect of the contract. Again, if they didn't and they were non-adjudicated, the contract is voidable. If they did not understand the nature and effect of the contract and they are adjudicated, the contract is void. For intoxication, again, you have a limited capacity to enter into a contract. So whether that's because of alcohol or drugs or even prescription drugs, it's voidable, but it has to be voluntary intoxication, which means you were the person who voluntarily put the item into your body. The same rule of necessaries applies to incompetence and voluntary intoxication. Thus, people lacking mental capacity are liable for not the actual value, but under quasi-law for the reasonable value of their necessaries. So again, people who are lacking mental capacity or intoxicated may disaffirm while they have the limited capacity to contract. But again, especially if you're intoxicated, your contract will be ratified if you don't disaffirm within a certain quick amount of time after regaining back your senses when you sober up. So again, you got to be very careful. This concludes our discussion on Chapter 13, Capacity to Contract. Have a great day.